In a city that no longer exists, in a time that has been forgotten by everyone except the storytellers, there lived a woodcutter who changed his fate by listening. He heard a password that was never meant for him, entered a cave that was never meant to be opened, and set in motion a chain of events that would test his family, his courage, and the cleverness of a slave girl who saw more than anyone gave her credit for. This is the story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. Chapter 1. The Woodcutter Who Listened. Ali Baba was not a rich man. He was not a powerful man. He was a woodcutter who rose before dawn every morning, loaded his 3 donkeys with axes and rope, and walked into the forest to cut wood that he would sell in the market for barely enough to feed his family. His wife mended their clothes until the fabric was more thread than cloth. His son wore shoes with holes in the soles that let the dust in. They were poor, and they had accepted it as their lot in life, the way a man accepts the weather. But on one particular morning, everything changed. Ali Baba had walked deeper into the forest than usual, looking for trees that had not already been stripped by other woodcutters. He was high in the hills, where the air was thin and the trees were old. He had just started swinging his axe when he heard the thunder of hooves, many hooves, more than he could count. He dropped his axe and scrambled up the nearest large tree, pulling himself into the branches just as the first horseman broke through the tree line. He counted them from behind a screen of leaves, 40 men, armed to the teeth. They wore dark cloaks and carried swords at their hips, and their faces were hard from years of wind and sun and violence. Their leader was a tall man with a scar that ran from his eyebrow to his jaw. Ali Baba held his breath and did not move a muscle. The horsemen stopped in the clearing below him. The captain dismounted and walked to a flat rock face at the edge of the clearing. He stood before it and spoke 2 words that Ali Baba would never forget. Open sesame. The rock face split open. A doorway appeared where there had been only solid stone. Light from inside the cave spilled out, and Ali Baba caught a glimpse of gold. The 40 men filed inside, each one emerging a few moments later carrying bags that clinked and bulged with weight. They loaded their horses. The captain spoke again. Close sesame, and the rock sealed itself shut like a wound healing. They rode away as quickly as they had come, leaving nothing but dust and silence. Ali Baba waited until the sound of hooves had faded completely. He waited until the birds started singing again. Then he climbed down from the tree on legs that were trembling so badly he had to hold onto the trunk to stay upright. He walked to the rock face, stood where the captain had stood, took a deep breath, and said the words, "Open sesame." Chapter 2. The Cave of Gold. The rock parted. Ali Baba stepped through into a cave that glowed like the inside of a dream. Every surface was covered in treasure. Gold coins stacked to the ceiling in columns that would take a man a week to count. Jeweled swords hanging from the walls in leather scabbards that were themselves worth a fortune. Silk carpets rolled and stacked like firewood, their colors still bright after years of storage. Chests overflowing with emeralds, rubies, sapphires, and pearls the size of his thumbnail. It was not a cave. It was the hoard of a sultan, hidden away by thieves who had spent a generation robbing caravans and plundering cities across 3 continents. Ali Baba stood in the middle of it all and felt a strange calm settle over him. He did not stop to admire. He did not let himself dream. He filled his pockets and the front of his shirt with gold coins, as many as he could carry without tearing the fabric. He stuffed handfuls into his belt and his boots. Then he stepped out of the cave, said "Close, Sesame," and walked home with his 3 donkeys following behind him, carrying nothing but firewood on their backs. The gold was hidden inside his coat, pressing against his chest with every step. His wife thought he had stolen the coins. She was terrified. When he told her the truth about the cave, the password, the 40 thieves, she did not know whether to laugh or cry. She weighed the gold on a small scale to see how much they had. It was more than they had earned in 10 years of cutting wood. Ali Baba buried the coins in their garden under a fig tree and tried to go back to his normal life, but it was too late for that. The secret was already burning a hole in his chest, and secrets have a way of finding their way out, whether you want them to or not. Chapter 3. The brother who could not contain himself. Cassim was Ali Baba's older brother. He was rich, mean, and endlessly curious about how his poor sibling had suddenly become wealthy. He had built his fortune through hard work and sharp dealing, and he resented the idea that his lazy brother might have found an easier path. He watched Ali Baba from across the marketplace, noting the new shoes on his nephew and the fresh bread his sister-in-law was buying with a confidence she had never shown before. He cornered Ali Baba in the street and demanded the truth. Ali Baba loved his brother, but he also knew that Cassim could not keep a secret to save his life. Cassim talked too much, spent too freely, and trusted everyone. Ali Baba tried to dodge the question. He made excuses. He changed the subject. But Cassim grabbed him by the arm and threatened to report him to the authorities as a thief. Ali Baba had no choice. He led his brother into a quiet alley and told him everything: the tree, the horsemen, the password, the cave of gold. Cassim did not thank him. He did not offer to share or help or even acknowledge the risk his brother had taken. He ran home, gathered 10 empty sacks, strapped them to a mule, and rode to the forest the next morning before the sun had even risen. He found the rock face easily. He said, "Open, Sesame." The cave opened, and Cassim walked inside like he already owned every coin in it. He filled every sack. He filled his pockets. He stuffed coins into his hat. He was so consumed by greed that when he tried to leave, his mind went completely blank. The word was gone. He stood at the mouth of the cave, his arms full of gold, and tried every grain he could think of. Open barley, open wheat, open rye, open corn. Nothing worked. The rock stayed sealed shut, and behind him, from somewhere in the forest, he heard the unmistakable sound of horses approaching. Chapter 4. The body in the courtyard. The thieves found Cassim standing in the middle of their treasure, surrounded by empty sacks, gold coins scattered at his feet like fallen leaves. He tried to explain. He begged for mercy. He offered them everything he had, which was, of course, nothing compared to what they already owned. The captain looked at him with the cold patience of a man who had killed many times before. Cassim was still talking when the sword came down. The thieves knew that Cassim could not have found the cave on his own. Someone else had told him the password. Someone else had been inside their cave. The captain gave the order. They cut Cassim's body into quarters as a warning, hung the pieces just inside the cave entrance where anyone who entered would see them first, and rode away into the hills without looking back. That night Ali Baba returned to the cave. His hands were shaking as he said the password. The rock opened. He found what was left of his brother hanging in the torchlight, and he wept silently in the gold-lit darkness. He wrapped the pieces in a clean cloth, loaded them onto his donkey, and brought them home through the back streets of the city, keeping to the shadows, his heart pounding at every sound. Cassim's wife wailed when she saw the body. Her screams echoed through the courtyard. She shouted that the neighbors would hear, that everyone would know, that the thieves would come for them all before morning. The household dissolved into chaos. Servants ran in circles. Cassim's wife collapsed against the wall. Ali Baba stood in the middle of it all, not knowing what to do. It was Morgiana who stepped forward. Morgiana was Cassim's young slave girl, sharp-eyed and quiet, the kind of person who noticed things that others missed. While everyone else was panicking, crying, and shouting uselessly, she was thinking. She said, very calmly, "I can fix this, but you have to trust me. You must do exactly what I say and ask no questions." Ali Baba looked at her. He had no other options. He nodded, and Morgiana began her work. Chapter 5. The Shoemaker Who Sewed a Secret. Morgiana left the house before dawn, when the streets were still grey, and the morning prayers were echoing from the mosques. She walked through the winding alleys to the market, where an old shoemaker named Baba Mustafa worked at his stall. She knew he was the best stitcher in the entire city, a craftsman whose hands had not lost their steadiness even as his eyes had grown weak with age. He was blind in one eye, which meant he would not recognize anyone he did not see clearly, and that was exactly what Morgiana needed. She paid him 3 gold coins, far more than he would earn in a week of honest work, and blindfolded him with a strip of clean cloth. She led him through the streets, turning left and right so many times that he lost all sense of direction. She brought him to Cassim's house, removed the blindfold, and showed him what needed to be done. The shoemaker was terrified. His hands trembled. But Morgiana was calm, as steady as a rock in a river. She paid him 3 more coins and told him to do what he did best. Baba Mustafa took a deep breath and began to work. He sewed Cassim's body back together with the same careful, even stitches he used on the finest shoes in the city. He worked in silence, and when he was done, he stepped back and nodded. It was as if Cassim had never been cut at all. Morgiana blindfolded him again and led him back through the maze of streets to his stall. She paid him a final coin for his silence. He never knew whose house he had visited or whose body he had sewn. Cassim was buried quietly the next day in the family plot. The neighbors whispered, but nobody asked questions. The secret held, for now. Chapter 6. The Empty Cave. A few days later, the thieves returned to their cave to add more treasure from a recent raid. They found Cassim's body gone. The captain stood in the middle of his treasure room, the torchlight flickering across his scarred face, and felt a cold fury rising in his chest like bile. Someone in the city knew about the cave. Someone knew the password. And that someone had taken the body, buried it, and covered up the murder so cleanly that nobody in the neighborhood even suspected. The captain gathered his men and announced that one of them would have to go into the city, disguise himself as an ordinary citizen, and find the man who had done this. The first thief volunteered. He shaved his beard, put on clean merchant's clothes, and walked through the city gates with the relaxed stride of a man who had nothing to hide. He wandered the markets, listening to conversations, watching for anything unusual, buying small things he did not need. And then he found Baba Mustafa's shoe stall. He sat down, bought a pair of sandals, and struck up a friendly conversation. He mentioned, as if it were a curious rumor he had heard in another city, that there was a story about a man whose body had been sewn back together. Did the shoemaker happen to know if there was any truth to it? Baba Mustafa was old and honest, and not good at lying, especially when he was not expecting to be tested. He told the disguised thief everything: the blindfold, the walk through winding streets, the house, the body he had stitched with his finest thread. The thief smiled warmly, thanked him, and paid him generously for the sandals. He followed the directions back to Cassim's house. He took a piece of white chalk from his pocket and marked the wooden door with a small cross, visible only to someone who was specifically looking for it. Then he returned to the forest to give the captain the good news. Chapter 7. The Chalk Marks. The thief told the captain he had found the house. The captain was pleased. That very night, he said, "We will go into the city and kill everyone inside. We will leave no witnesses." The thieves sharpened their swords and waited for darkness. But Morgiana saw the chalk mark the moment she turned the corner. She was returning from the market with a basket of vegetables balanced on her hip when she noticed it, a small white cross on the door, drawn in chalk at about eye level. It had not been there when she left the house that morning. She stopped walking for just a second, long enough to register it, and then continued as if she had seen nothing. She did not know who had put it there or why, but she knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who had survived by being careful her entire life, that it meant danger. It meant someone was watching the house, marking it for a reason she could not yet see. She did not tell Ali Baba. She did not raise an alarm. She walked calmly back to the market, bought a piece of chalk identical to the one that had been used, and spent the next hour walking through every street in the surrounding neighborhood. She marked every single door she passed with an identical white cross, the same size, the same shape, in the exact same position at eye level. By the time she was done, the entire district looked like it had been marked by the same hand. That night, the thieves crept through the darkened streets of the city. They moved in absolute silence, keeping to the shadows, their swords hidden under their cloaks. They found the street, they looked for the marked door, and they found instead that every single door on every single street had a white cross on it. The captain stood in the middle of the road, his fists clenched, his teeth grinding, barely containing his rage. He had no way of knowing which house was the right one. He could not attack every house in the neighborhood. He cursed under his breath and withdrew his men into the darkness. The first attempt had failed. Someone in that household was smarter than he had expected. Chapter 8. The 40 Jars. The captain was not a man who gave up easily. He had spent years building his gang from nothing. He had survived ambushes and betrayals and storms at sea. He would not let one clever slave girl and a woodcutter rob him of everything he had built. He came up with a new plan, a better one. He bought 40 large clay jars, the kind used to transport oil across the desert. He filled 39 of them with his best men, armed with daggers and short swords, crouched in the darkness with their breathing slow and controlled. The 40th jar he filled with real oil, pressing it down through the clay so the smell would mask the presence of the men. He loaded the jars onto a train of mules and dressed himself in the robes of a traveling oil merchant. He drove the mules through the city gates just as the sun was beginning to set. He stopped at Ali Baba's house and knocked on the door. He introduced himself as a poor merchant who had nowhere to stay for the night. He asked for shelter. Ali Baba, who was kind to strangers by nature, welcomed him inside without hesitation. He offered him food and a warm place to sleep. He told his servants to bring the merchant's jars into the courtyard where they would be safe. The captain thanked him warmly and ate the food that was offered. When the household settled down for the night, he lay down in his room with his eyes open, listening to the silence. His men were hidden in the jars in the courtyard. When the house was quiet, they would emerge, kill Ali Baba and his entire family, and take back everything that had been stolen from the cave. But Morgiana was not asleep. Chapter 9. The Oil That Went Out. Morgiana was in the kitchen, working by the light of a single oil lamp, when the flame began to sputter and fade. The lamp was running low. She decided to take a small amount of oil from one of the merchant's jars in the courtyard to refill it. She carried an empty pot out into the night, lifted the lid of the nearest jar, and froze. Inside the jar, barely visible in the moonlight, was a man, armed, breathing quietly, waiting. Morgiana did not scream. She did not drop the pot. She lowered the lid back into place with hands that did not shake, and she checked the other jars one by one. Every single jar held a man. Only the 40th jar, pushed to the back of the row, contained actual oil. She understood everything in a single moment. The kindly oil merchant, the convenient arrival at sunset, the jars in the courtyard. It was a trap, and the jaws were about to close. She went back to the kitchen. She filled the largest pot she could find with oil from the one real jar. She built up the fire and heated the oil until it was bubbling and hissing and steaming. Then she carried the pot to the courtyard, moving silently in her bare feet, and lifted the lid of each jar one by one. She poured the boiling oil into every jar that held a man. The thieves inside died without a sound, submerged in scalding liquid before they could even cry out. Steam rose from the jars into the cool night air like souls leaving bodies. When she was done, Morgiana wiped her hands on her dress, put the pot back in the kitchen, and went to her room. She did not wake Ali Baba. She did not tell anyone. She simply lay down and waited for what would happen next. Chapter 10. The Dance of the Knife. The captain woke in the middle of the night and crept out to the courtyard to signal his men. He tapped the first jar. Silence. He tapped another. Nothing. He lifted a lid and smelled hot oil and death. He understood immediately. His men were dead. All of them. He had been betrayed again, and this time he had lost everything. He fled into the night, climbing over the back wall and disappearing into the city, leaving his jars and his dead crew behind. But he was not finished. He was a patient man. He had built a gang once. He could rebuild. He grew out his beard, changed his clothes, and altered his appearance until he looked nothing like the oil merchant who had arrived with 40 jars. Months passed. When he finally returned to the city, he looked like a respectable merchant named Khwaja Hassan, a dealer in fine fabrics from the East. He befriended Ali Baba slowly, carefully. He met him at the market, shared tea with him, spoke of trade and travel. Ali Baba liked him. He invited him to dinner at his home. The captain accepted. He sat at Ali Baba's table and smiled and ate and drank, and Ali Baba had no idea that the man across from him had spent years planning to kill him. After the meal, Ali Baba called for entertainment. Morgiana came in to perform a dance for the guests. She wore a silk dress that caught the candlelight, and she carried a small, sharp dagger in her right hand. She moved across the room with the grace of flowing water, her bare feet silent on the tiles, the blade spinning and glinting in the light. The captain watched her, relaxed, his guard down. He had never seen her face clearly before. He did not know that the girl who had killed his men was dancing right in front of him. Chapter 11. The Last Thief. But Morgiana knew. She had recognized the captain the moment he walked through the front door. The same bearing, the same way his eyes moved constantly, scanning every corner of the room, measuring every window and exit. She knew who he was, and she knew exactly why he was here. He had come to finish what he started. She danced closer to him, her movements smooth and unhurried, the silk of her dress flowing around her like water. She twirled the dagger, catching the candlelight, and the captain clapped along with the music, a warm smile on his face. He was relaxed. He was enjoying himself. He had no idea that the girl who had destroyed his gang was standing right behind him. She moved behind him, still spinning, still dancing. The guests were watching her, not him. The music swelled, and then, in one clean motion, she drove the dagger into his chest, between his ribs, straight into his heart. He died before he could draw his sword. He fell forward onto the table, his face hitting the platter of meat, and the candles shook and the wine spilled across the white cloth like blood. Ali Baba shouted in horror and lunged forward. The other guests screamed and pushed their chairs back from the table. Men called for guards, women fainted, but Morgiana stood over the body, calm and steady, the bloody dagger still in her hand. She told Ali Baba the truth in a voice that did not waver. The oil merchant who had arrived with 40 jars was the captain of the 40 thieves. The jars held his men. She had boiled them alive in the courtyard that night. And this man, this friendly merchant named Khwaja Hassan, who had shared their bread and salt and sat at their table, was the same man. He had come back to finish what he started. There was no other way to stop him. If she had hesitated, he would have killed every person in the house before morning. Ali Baba sat in silence for a long time, staring at the body on his table. The blood was still spreading across the cloth. The candles flickered. He looked at Morgiana, and the girl he had always thought of as a quiet servant was suddenly something else entirely. He stood up, walked to her, and embraced her with tears streaming down his face. Chapter 12. The Cave Without a Secret. Ali Baba gave Morgiana her freedom that very night. He did not stop there. He adopted her as his daughter, and when his son was old enough, he married them in a ceremony that the entire neighborhood talked about for weeks. Morgiana, who had once been a slave, became the lady of the house. She had saved Ali Baba's life 3 times, once with chalk, once with hot oil, and once with a dagger. He owed her everything. The cave in the forest remained a secret known only to Ali Baba. He never told anyone else the password, not even his son. He used the treasure slowly and carefully, taking only what he needed, sharing with his family and with the poorer of the city. Never too much at once, never too obviously. He did not want to attract the attention of another captain or another gang of thieves. He grew old, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. He watched them play in the garden where he had buried the first gold coins under the fig tree. He watched Morgiana run the household with the same sharp eyes that had once seen a chalk mark on a door and understood what it meant. And he walked through the city with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had found fortune not through greed, but through a single moment of courage. And somewhere, in a palace far away, a storyteller named Scheherazade told this very tale to a king who had killed 1,000 women before her. She told him about the woodcutter who listened from a tree, the brother who could not resist the lure of gold, and the slave girl who saved everyone with nothing but hot oil and a heart full of courage. The king listened, and for another night he let Scheherazade live. And that is how the story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves survived to be told on this night to you. The end.